We care about the environment. Global warming is getting worse. Glaciers are melting. The water level is getting higher. That's why we made this experiment to measure the tide movement. This is our tide monitor. If you bury it in the ground, it will tell you the moisture of the area. This tide monitor is made from a microbit connected to a sensor and a battery. Then all of it is put into a plastic container and sealed with tape. The hard part of making this tide monitor was preventing water from leaking in. But in the end, we figured that if we sealed the extra holes with wax and put a lot of tape on the places that would leak, it would prevent the water from leaking in. We buried this tide monitor at Shoreline Park, a nearby San Francisco bay. We thought that we could find the tide movement of the ocean even though we buried it next to the bay, because bays are also connected to the oceans.
Here's our graph and the data we collected. The x-axis represents the time, the y-axis represents the moisture. We had only 24 hours to measure it, and we got a nice curve over here. At about 8:30 when we put it in, it was at its highest point at around 400, which was the moisture in the soil. And then at around 5 a.m. the next day, we got our lowest tide. Then we went gradually up and then stayed pretty steady until we took it out the next day. However, if we compare our graph to another graph, like we did with this one from INOS AA, we can see there's a huge difference between how steady the tide levels stay. We observed similar low tides to the one in the graph from our trusted source, but not the same high tides. Here's what we learned. Based on our graph, we noticed that the moisture levels of the water stayed surprisingly steady and it didn't change a lot. This might be because we buried it next to a drain, or we buried it too close to the bay so it's always wet there, or we should have put the microbit closer to the surface of the water. We were not aware of this before the experiment.
According to our graph, we arrived to a conclusion. We found out that the moisture of the water went from a high point of 400 around when we first put it in at 8:38 p.m. Then it slowly dropped until its lowest point, which was 300, at about 6 a.m. the next morning. Afterwards, it gradually increased to 350 until we took it out after about 24 hours putting it in. This means that the tides are higher at night and lower in the early morning and so on.